Jesus, no turning back, no turning back. You guys have a seat.
Well, good morning and welcome to Catalyst. My name is Dave. For those of you guys that are visiting here the first time, I'm one of the pastors here. I want to welcome all of you who are joining us online from your homes or your living rooms or your phones or wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today. We're in a series called Roadblocks, tough questions, things that are stumbling blocks to people coming to Christianity. And if you've missed any of those, please go back and look at all the other ones we have online. They're on our YouTube page. Those of you all that are on Facebook and everything, we want to invite you to join our, follow us on Facebook. My name's Dave Killer. You can friend request me. I'd love to get to know you. And especially you all online, if I don't get the pleasure of meeting you on purpose, in person, obviously on purpose, but in person. Friend request me on Facebook. I'd love to get to know you. Send me a message, and I'd love to connect with you. So like I said, we're in a series called Roadblocks. And we are in part 7, and this is one of the kind of the ones that's personal, almost an accusation that's been lobbed at me many times as a pastor. It is this: how can you support the church when the church has a history of wrongdoing? That's one of the things that I encounter as a pastor an awful lot. And I can remember I was in my second day as youth minister in Tennessee, my second day. The year was 2002. This was the year the Boston Archdiocese of the Catholic Church had been investigated, and 5 priests had been indicted on child abuse charges. I don't know if you guys remember that, if you were alive back then. A lot of you guys weren't, but as old people were. And so that was going on. Well, I decided to spend the first week there calling all the kids in the youth group. I had a list. I didn't know these kids. I just called them up. That was in the day before cell phones, so you called the home phone. Anybody remember that? When you called the home phone and somebody answered, you had to ask for who. Yeah, it was in those days. And I called one house, and the mom answered the phone, and I introduced myself. So I'm the new youth minister at the church, and I'd like to introduce myself to you and to possibly talk with your son about being part of our youth group. And something happened I didn't expect. The mom started yelling at me. She basically said, "How dare you call me? How dare you call here?" Called me a pedophile who was after her son. Told me the church was a place that abused kids, and how dare you, don't ever call me again, this kind of thing. I was kind of taken aback. I'd been there for 2 days. I hadn't done anything. But my question was she justified in those accusations? On the one hand, no. Like I said, I didn't live in Boston. I didn't do any of these things that were in the news. But on the other hand, I represented the church, and I understand the fallacy in calling the church because there's churches everywhere. But the church, quote unquote, had done evil things to children. And if you talk with any atheist or any church basher, and the history of abuses of the church will come out in conversation. They always do. The Crusades, the Inquisition, the Salem witch trials, the colonization of indigenous people, the abuses that happened there, those will come up in conversation. And I remember in college reading a book called Things Fall Apart. It was about the colonization of Africa and the abuses that took place at the hands of the missionaries. So with all that's gone on in the history of the church, how can we be a part of it? More than that, how can I be a leader in the church? How can we continue to support it? Be a part of it if it's got such a terrible history. Well, I've actually studied this an awful lot, and I've come to the conclusion that we've misdiagnosed the problem. The problem isn't the church. The problem isn't government. The problem is this: power corrupts. I want you guys to remember that power is the problem. Matthew 20, 25 through 28, Jesus says this. Jesus called them together and said, "You know, the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must become your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. The problem isn't the church, you all. The problem is power. An example. Let's say that a disease is going around. It's kind of new, isn't it? Okay, but this disease is not COVID-19. This disease is the disease of the mind. And let's say that it infects 10 people in Nicholasville in central Kentucky. All right? Let's say that it infects 10 people. 2 are white, 2 are black, 2 are Hispanic, 2 are Asian, and 2 are Native American. And this disease causes all 10 of those people to go completely berserk, and they each kill 10 people. Do we look at the 2 white or the 2 black or the 2 Hispanic or the 2 Asian or the 2 Native American and say, look what this ethnicity is responsible for? No, we wouldn't do that. Well, we would if we were fools. But we wouldn't do that if we were wise. We would look and see what they had something in common, if they had the same disease. Okay, in the same way, the church is not the disease. Power is the disease. You understand? Power is the disease. Anyone who has power tends to act this way. It's a disease. The church has been infected from it from time to time, and we need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge that the disease of power has infected the church, as it has infected lots of people and things. And because the church is made up of people, we're always going to be susceptible to power. Always. But remember, let's diagnose the disease accurately and make sure we correctly diagnose the problem. But like I said, the church, unfortunately, is not immune from power because it's led by people. However, when the church acts like those infected with power, Jesus condemns it. Don't forget that. Jesus condemns that in Matthew 20:25. We aren't supposed to use power the way a non-Christian person would, or the way the world would. It is in direct contradiction to what Jesus said. Without the most powerful people in the church, listen, the most powerful people in the church are supposed to serve. They're supposed to be the servants. That is how Jesus defined greatness, was service, not by abusing. Okay? And so here's the thing, abuse of power, not the church, is the cause of most problems throughout history. Remember that it's the abuse of power, not the church, is the cause of most problems throughout history. Whenever someone starts talking about the history of the church, the abuses that have gone on, and I fully acknowledge that people that have called themselves Christians have become susceptible to this and have committed atrocities. We need to own that first. But I always say this. I ask them when that was. They bring up the Crusades. I said, when was that? Well, it was 1,000 years ago. When was the Inquisition? Well, that was 500 years ago. When were the Salem witch trials? Well, that was 300 years ago. And I remind them of atheistic governments. Not 1,000 years ago. Not 500 years ago. Not 300 years ago. But less than 100 years ago. During some of it during my parents' lifetime, all within my grandparents' lifetime. Listen to this. Chairman Mao, in his Great Leap Forward in China, killed between 45 million and 60 million people, depending on what source you use. I found different sources as I was doing research for this. Joseph Stalin is credited with killing 40 million people during his leadership of the Soviet Union. That is not the church. That is a proclaimed atheist doing that. Starving people in Ukraine, purging his party, sending people off to gulags. Adolf Hitler. And people say, well, Hitler was a Christian. No, he was not. Okay? He was not. Is credited with killing 30 million people during his leadership of the Third Reich. And all of those took place within my grandparents' lifetimes. Somewhere between 100 million and 130 million people in a 50-year period were killed. And that was not the church. That was someone who hated the church, but was infected with the same disease, power. In contrast to the 100 million to 130 million people that were killed in a 50-year period under communist atheistic governments, the Spanish Inquisition took place over a period of 350 years. And recent research has shown between 3,000 and 5,000 people were killed during it, according to one source. Other researchers put the death toll as high as 300,000 over a 350-year period. That's far too many, but let's compare. The Crusades, the Inquisition, Salem witch trials between 1,000 and 300 years ago, nothing recently. So if we're going to hold the church responsible for the abuses of history, let's make sure that we let's hold everyone responsible for it, okay? Let's make sure that we are fair. Fair is fair. You can see the disease of power is what is infected, not just the church, because the church and atheistic governments believe something completely differently, and yet both were susceptible to power. So let's diagnose the problem rightly. Okay? The problem is power. And everybody knows about the Catholic Church sex abuse scandal. I, as a youth minister, that made my job 100 times harder back then. Because I was accused of things I didn't do. I was thrown in with people that were accused of this, and I had to bear the insults and the suspicion and everything like that. I had nothing to do with that. So I know exactly what that is. It's cause untold hurt and suffering to children and now grown adults. We acknowledge that and we own that. But do we know the growing rise of sexual abuse in public schools? Did you know that? Did you know that there's a rising tide of it and it doesn't seem to be stopping anywhere? See, the problem isn't the church. The problem is in people in positions of power that use that for selfish reasons. Let's correctly diagnose the problem. And for those of us that would abuse children or little ones that are placed in our care, these words are from Jesus to you. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. That's the Son of God talking. Clearly, that we are to take care of our little ones. Take care of the little ones, and that we are not to use position of power to do that. Okay? We need to call that out where we see it. So as a church, instead, let's develop character in our people and put forth a vision of integrity so that people in power will use it for a force for good and not for evil or selfishness. That's my response to anyone who challenges, why are you part of the church when all these abuses have taken place? My response to them, I said that power is the disease. And that is what is infected. And that, if you look through all of history, power is what causes that. It's not the church. Time to time, the church has been infected by power and done things. But on the other hand, look at the last 2,000 years. And I'm going to tell you this is why I am a part of a church, because I always tell people that challenge me on this why I am part of a church. This is why I am a church member, and this is it, that the church is the hope of the world. I believe that. I will go to my grave believing that, because there's no better truth that I've grabbed hold of. This is why I'm a church member first, is that Jesus established it. I am part of the church because my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ set it up. That's why. And I don't need anything else, but we have some other things. Listen to what Jesus says in Matthew 16:18. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. This is why Jesus set up his church. It's not so we could get together and have community and everything, even though that's wonderful, that's part of it. But this is why Jesus set up the church. He set up the church to be the conveyor of biblical truth to a lost and broken world. And there is no plan B. The church is God's plan. It is his bride. The Bible refers to the church as Jesus' bride, that this is his invention, his people, and it is our job to take the truth of the gospel to a lost and broken world. That is why the church is here, and there is no plan B. That's one of the reasons I'm a part of it. Jesus established it. We don't need anything else. But there is more. Wait, there is more. The second thing is that we're told to be a part of it. We are told to be a part of it with all its stains, with all its blemishes, and all its weird and crazy things and strange people that hang around the church. You know that, right? If you ever wonder why you meet so weird and strange people around the church, well, the church is a light. And like all lights, it attracts bugs. I'm a bug. You're a bug. We are, okay? And what we're told to be a part of it, Hebrews 10:25 says this, let us not neglect meeting together. Some people need to hear that. Let us not neglect meeting together as some have made a habit, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. We are supposed to continue to meet together. We're supposed to be part of the church for a very good reason. I've heard from several people that have walked away from the church. That all the reasons that the church is full of hypocrites and churches has a history of violence and not getting anything out of it and all this kind of stuff. Don't like the music, this kind of, and I always hear the same thing, you guys, that I can more fully follow Christ by doing my own thing at home. Have you heard someone say that? I've heard that an awful lot. I've worshiped better taking a walk in the woods than I do in church. Well, I'm a hunter. I love to take walks in the woods, and yes, while I'm out in the deer stand, I'm praying a lot. Lord, bring me the buck. I'm doing that, and that's worship. It's great. I've heard it all, and I have no doubt that these folks are sincere. I really have no doubt. But do you know what happens to every single person that tells me that? Do you know what happens? I'm not talking 100% of the time. Within 6 months to a year of not going to church, not being a part of church, their lives look no different than any non-believer out there. 6 months is really pushing it, but definitely a year. Now, if you're a Christian and your life looks no different than someone who is not a Christian, what does that say, you guys? What does that say about God? It's if you claim Christ, but you have the same priorities as a non-believer, if you spend money the same way a non-believer does, you have the same goals, you have the same view on social issues, you have the same values, you have the same stress and anxiety and worry, and you have the same words that come out of your mouth as a non-believer, what does that say, you guys? It says one of two things. It says that God is completely impotent, and that Him being an active part of your life does absolutely nothing. Or it means that He is not a part of your life. Now, which one is more likely? We're told to be part of the church because of the following three things. Number one, it's how we stay faithful to Christ for the long haul. I've found one thing about God in my life, and He is not interested in 1 day or 1 week or 1 month or even a year or even 2 years. He's interested in decades and centuries. And He does not want you to be faithful to Him or to your church or in prayer or in study for a day or a week or a month. He wants you to be faithful for your entire life. See, God doesn't do things short term. He does things in the long term. We see that in His creation. The reason He created in 6 days or 6 stages, whatever you want, He could have done it all like this, but that's not how He works. He does things in stages. If any of you have struggled with addiction or a problem, does He solve it like that? No. He solves and heals over time, doesn't He? That's the way your body heals over time. Why? Because He isn't into quick fixes. He's into the long haul. And guys, if we're not part of a church, we will not stay faithful to Christ over the long haul. Oh, you may stay faithful for a week or two or a couple months, and you may really, really, really do some great stuff for a couple months, maybe even a year. But 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, which is what Jesus is interested in, not so much. See, we stay faithful for the long haul. You know, we in the church are weird people. We make prizes out of martyrs, people who decide that they're going to give their life for Christ. You've heard, like in Columbine High School, Cassie Bernal and Rachel Scott, that when Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris had guns to their head, do you believe in Jesus? Yes. And they say, why? And they don't even wait for a response. They just kill them. We make such prizes out of it, as we should. But you know who else we should make prizes of? You know who else we should be holding up as examples? Are the people who don't die for Christ, but yet live for Christ. How about this? People who stay faithful to Christ for the entire course of their lives, who finish strong, who stay faithful, who stay in the game. People who support their churches day in and week out and over months and years and decades, week after week, year after year, who are constant in the fight to defeat temptation, who pray for their neighbors, who study Scripture regularly, who make disciples, who baptize their children. They raise up godly men and young women for the next generation of church leadership, who volunteer in children's ministry and youth ministry and worship ministry, and they go on mission trips. They love their neighbors. They forgive their enemies. These people that never make headlines, we should be as in awe of them as we do the person who gives their life for Christ in a moment. Because to follow Christ over decades is far harder than giving your life for Christ in an instant. To defeat Satan, to wrestle with temptation over decades, that's tough. And we need to be elevating them. But you will not be able to do that if you're not part of a church. I've seen it tried. It doesn't work. You won't be able to do that if you're not part of a church, plain and simple. We stay faithful to Christ over the long haul because we're part of the church, because we're around people that encourage us, like Hebrews 10 says. The second reason we're part of a church is that this is the way we make disciples of our children and others. I've shared this before. This is the thing that keeps me awake at night. This is the passage. I think this is the darkest, most haunting, most disturbing passage in all of Scripture. And right now I'm speaking to parents, speaking to grandparents, I'm speaking to people who have younger people in their lives that they love. I'm speaking to you right now. Joshua 2:10-12. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshiped various gods of the people around them. They aroused the Lord's anger. An entire generation grew up and didn't know the Lord. And so what do? They become atheists and live self-actualized lives? No, they found something else to worship that destroyed them. And that's exactly what will happen if we do not make disciples in our own homes. Our children are not going to grow up being free and self-actualized. No, they're going to find something else to worship, something toxic, something awful, okay? Something that won't give life. How does our solar system work? Our solar system, we have a sun with 8 planets and Pluto. The way I learned it, there were 9 planets, okay? Poor Pluto. Identity crisis. But anyway, if the sun, because of the sun is the center of gravity, we circle the sun. Do you know what would happen if the sun were to go away? If it were kidnapped and taken away? Do you know what would happen? Would the planets just kind of go into space? No, they wouldn't. You know what they would start doing? They would start circling the next greatest force, which is Jupiter. Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system. Because of its gravitational pull, we would start orbiting Jupiter. The problem is that Jupiter is not a star. It does not have warmth, does not have light. It does not have any of the life-giving power of the sun. But the planets would follow it because it's the next strongest thing. And in the same way, when we do not make disciples of our children, they will not follow God. They will follow the next most powerful thing that comes along that will not be life-giving. It will not be the purpose. And we see it all day today. So we're part of a church because that's the way we make disciples of our children and the next generation. Okay? I hope that passage in Joshua disturbs you as much as it does me, because we in the church are called to make disciples in our own home. And if you are not making disciples, your children are going to start worshiping the next most powerful thing that comes along. We see it right now. Do you know what it is right now? It's the media. Our children are being shaped, informed, having their values, their beliefs shaped by the media. Is that what you want? Unless they are orbiting Christ, they're going to start orbiting popular culture. And if you don't think that is the truth, check the headlines. Check the headlines. See, this is the way the work of Christ is done in the world. I'm part of a church because this is the way Christ gets the work done. Okay? In fact, it's been the greatest force for good in the history of humanity. I love this. It's been the greatest force for good in the history of humanity. I was on a plane one time on a mission trip overseas, and I was talking with a person next to me. She was a lady from France, and we got to talking. She asked me what I did for a living. And I told her, well, I work for an international corporation. She goes, oh yeah? She got real interested. Maybe I was a big high roller or something. Where are the headquarters? I said, well, the main headquarters are in Israel. It's where its company started, but we've branched out to every continent, just about every country, with locations everywhere. She goes, really? What kind of business is it? I said, it's incredible. You know, we provide lots of relief for famines, natural disasters, terrible occurrences. We're always the first people in, we're the last ones out. If there's a tsunami in Indonesia or a flood in Pakistan or a hurricane damage on the Gulf Coast, you name it, we're the first ones in, the last ones out. The most recent data I have is for 2007, this was a while ago, when we provided an estimated $89 billion around the world for natural disaster relief. And she goes, that's incredible. I said, that's not even the tip of the iceberg. I said, we're heavily involved in orphan care. Orphans are the people that are most vulnerable to sex trafficking and poverty and hunger and death. And so we provide all kinds of orphanages, food, water, education, clothing for these safety for them. One of the orphanages I'm directly involved in has 151 children, all sponsored, all taken care of. And we started a school for them, and they outperformed all the other kids in the area. A bunch of orphans have the highest performing school in their entire district. It's incredible. And I said, and in America alone, my corporation, my company, raises about $5 billion a year for orphan care, just in America. And she's like, no way. I said, not only that, we're also highly involved in education. Everywhere my company goes and starts, educational opportunities spring up. Most of the colleges and universities here in America were started by my company to train people. We're highly involved in literacy programs throughout the world, Europe, South Africa, South America, Europe, all the places of the world. People are taught how to read and then raise their standard of living because they're literate. It's been amazing. And I said we're also really highly involved in character building. We really want to build people's character, develop men and women of integrity. And, we emphasize honesty and respect for others and private property rights and selves. We emphasize marriage and nonviolence. A lot of our employees have been out marching for, back in the 60s to rid this world of discrimination and laws. We emphasize raising children and family, and invest all kinds of things in the family and in marriage and everything like this. We write articles and print books and everything we can do to help people structure their personal lives. I could go on and on. I said our company fights for human rights all over the world. Countries that are founded on our ideals are the freest societies in the world. Freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, etc. All products of the countries that are founded on our company's ideals. Aristotle and Plato believed that people weren't fit to be anything but slaves, and that slavery was as high as people should ever go. But our company stresses the dignity and worth of every human being. And we've taught her that everywhere we go. She goes, okay, you're making this up. There's no such company. I said, yes, there is. And she goes, well, what's it called? I said, it's a church. She goes, And I said, and the best thing we do, I said, we introduce people to Jesus Christ. It's the best thing we do. I said, all those things I just listed, none of those are going to matter in 50 years. You feed someone a piece of food, they're going to be hungry tomorrow. But you introduce someone to Jesus Christ, and they become a follower of Jesus Christ, and their sins are washed, and they're made right with God. They're reconciled to God. All of a sudden, that person is set for eternity. That's the best thing we can do. See, guys, for 2,000 years, this thing called the church has been the greatest force for good the world's ever seen. Don't believe the propaganda. This is the greatest thing you've ever seen. There's nothing like the church. There's nothing that does more work for good in the world than the church. You know why I'm a part of it? Because I want to be on the winning team. Church is the winning team. And I will tell you this, just on a personal note, not just worldwide, I'm going to bring it home right here. I've been a pastor for about 21 years in youth ministry and pastored here for 12, and I can honestly tell you the very best people I've ever met in my life, I've met through the church. We have friends, my wife, my family, and I, we have friends in multiple countries. We have more in common with people in Nepal and India, Pakistan, than we do with people down the street because we have Christ in common. I've met the most wonderful, caring, loving, forgiving, accepting people I've ever met in the church. I am constantly amazed at how kind, forgiving, loving people in the church are. Yeah, I've met some nasty people like you have too. I have too. And we can hold them up and say this is what people are. No, it's not. The most wonderful people I've ever met in my life have been part of the church. And I've been incredibly blessed to be part of it. See, right now, I'm going to call on everyone. I'm going to call on everyone online. I'm going to call everyone in this room. Right now is the time to be faithful. Right now is the time to be faithful. I know that a lot of people have not been to church in 4.5 months, 5 months. And it's easy to establish new habits. It's easy to establish new ways to spend Sunday morning. It's easy to become neglectful of prayer and study and loving your enemies and becoming and being part of the church, worship, things like this. I'm telling you not to do that. I'm calling you all to be faithful. Right now, this thing called the church, it needs to be the greatest force for good in our society. We in the church have a great opportunity to set a different vision for how we are to live. I'm going to invite the band to come on back up. I don't know about you all. This is personal to me. This week hasn't been a good week for me, you guys. I don't know if I wasn't here in church with you and I didn't get the fellowship and the love and the joy that I've gotten from you all with our elders' prayer time this morning and just seeing the laughter and the smiles. I don't know how I'd be doing right now. It's been a tough week. It's been a lot of ugliness directed towards me for stands I've taken and things I've written and things I guess because there's just a lot of ugliness everywhere. I've never seen so much ugliness between friends, between people that used to go to church together and now are parting ways over things that didn't even exist 2 months ago. I'm asking the church to be different. I'm asking the church in time where everyone is at each other's throats and everyone's being ugly and everyone's being divisive, I'm going to ask the church to be even more loving, to be even more forgiving, to take Jesus' words seriously, to love your enemies and pray for those that persecute you. You know that that's what Jesus told us to do, right? You get on Twitter and you see attacks of people being sucker punched from behind, people burning things and looting things, and the worst of human behaviors coming straight to our smartphones and our TVs and our computers. That should motivate the church to be even more loving, even more patient, even more forgiving, because it is in the darkest night that the light shines the greatest. And the church is a light. The main thing today is that the church is the hope of the world. Let's start acting like it. Right now, church, right now, people online, it's a time to be faithful, not to fall away. To be faithful. Let us continue in our prayers. Let's continue in our study. Let's continue meeting together however we can, whether it's by Zoom, whether it's in person, whatever you're comfortable with, but do not allow this world and the circumstances to cause you to fall away. Right now, we need faithfulness, and I'm calling you to it. God bless every one of you. I want to ask you to stand up and let's sing praises to this awesome God who forgives us of our sins, who loves us through our stupidity, and who has reached out to this world saying, I love you. Let's sing.